Okay, I want to welcome everyone here tonight for our study on chapter 7 of Revelation. And I'll begin with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Amen. Okay, guys, tonight we're going to shift away from the location. We're shifting from the throne room where last week we ended up with uh, the vision of seeing the four creatures and all the opening up the seals and all that. And so now we're going to shift it back to earth. And chapter 7, we're going to look at chapter 7. Actually, we're going to look at just the first part of chapter 7 tonight, but it's divided into two parts. Verses 1 through 8 describe the sealing of God's people from a coming judgment. And then 9 through 17 tells us about a vast multitude of believers who are alive during the time of the Great Tribulation that is coming to the earth. Now, this lesson tonight is probably going to have a lot of questions for you because I'm probably going to touch on some things that people have either been taught another way or maybe they just have some questions on it. So jump in there when you do have a question. So let's go ahead and start with the reading Revelation 7, 1-3. It's after this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, so that no wind would blow on the earth or on the sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel coming up from the east, having the seal of the living God. He cried out with a loud voice to the four angels who were permitted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, "Do no harm to the earth or the sea or the trees until we have a seal on the until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God." So here we are. The result of having these four angels releasing the wind is that's in the opening of the seventh seal, that will be described in chapter 8 when we get there. The seventh seal is the seven trumpet shofar judgments, and then the seventh of the trumpet shofar judgments is the seven bowl judgments. So that's the way that follows along. And so, we'll get to those things in time, but tonight we're looking at these four angels. Now, these are not the same as the ones in the throne room. Don't believe. They are completely different. They have the different function, and it says they're holding back the winds, and it says from the four corners of the earth. Now, obviously, we don't have four. The earth is not flat, and we don't have the four corners, but that would be generally believed to be the cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. And so just basically the idea of it is that the angels are just holding back this destructive force of winds. Now, the four winds, that would be a destructive a judgment, and it also could refer back to the four horsemen that we studied in chapter 6. And so it's similar to what we saw in Daniel. If you remember back in Daniel, we saw that he used the similar apocalyptic language. Daniel said, "I was looking in my vision at night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were churning up the great sea. Four huge beasts came up from the sea, each different from the others." Now that kind of looks like those four beasts that were up in the throne room that we saw before, but it's the idea of it is they're coming, they're holding back the winds. And in Zechariah, there's in Zechariah 6 and 5, it says, the angel answered me saying, there are four winds of heaven that go forth from the presence of the Lord of all the earth. And in fact, Zechariah had a very similar language to what was in Revelation. I'm going to go ahead and read that first. It's just 8 verses here. Again, I lifted up my eyes, and behold, I saw 4 chariots emerging from between the 2 mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses. The second chariot had black horses. The third chariot had white horses. And the fourth chariot had strong dapple horses. And then I responded by saying to the angels speaking with me, what are these, my Lord? And the angel answered, these are the 4 winds of heaven that go forth from the presence of the Lord of all the earth. The chariot with the black horse is going to the land of the north. The white ones have gone out after them, but the dapple ones have gone to the land of the south. When the strong ones went out, they requested to go to walk throughout the earth. He said, go walk throughout the earth. So they walked throughout the earth, and then they called and spoke to me, saying, look, those going toward the land of the north have given rest to my ruach in the north country. The ruach is typically, that's a spirit, like we'll say the ruach hakodesh, the Holy Spirit, but it also is sometimes used as wind. So you see there in Zechariah that he's using the ruach there as wind. Now, the language here is it's similar across Revelation, Daniel, Zechariah, but they're also dissimilar enough that I think we can't really say, this is exactly what those winds were, or what the exact nature of the wind. But we do know that that releasing them will bring further destruction on the earth. So, in view of this, the Lord would not allow the 4 winds to be released until his people are sealed and therefore protected from what is to follow. Now, this is really an example of God's mercy during these terrible judgments. Now, if we look back at the 6th seal there, when that was opened, the unrighteousness of the world hid from God and cried out, and this is in Revelation 6:17, for the great day of their wrath is come, and who is able to stand? Of course, the answer to that is that the people of God are able to stand because the Lord seals them for protection. Now, again, I'm going to say this. The winds, we don't really know what they are. The nature of it could be, certainly it's going to be part of God's judgment, but, what's he going to do? Let loose some of the demons that he's bound up for a while, and we don't know. It could be a combination of both, but I think the important part of it is it's going to be pretty nasty, pretty bad, and a lot of destruction. So now, John says that there's going to be. One thing I did want to bring out before we do this is that judgment versus persecution. Now, we need to keep in mind that there's a difference between God's judgment on the wicked and the wicked persecuting the saints, because God is going to pour out his judgment against the wicked. But at the same time, what we're seeing right now today, the wicked are persecuting the saints. Just look at all of the Christians that have been killed recently by ISIS, and that group there is that's the face of evil. There's no other way to describe ISIS other than just demonic, and from the pits of hell they are evil. So, and God in his promises here, he didn't he didn't really, he didn't promise protection from persecution and tribulation. He just said he's going to protect them from his wrath or his judgment. If you'll remember in John 16:33, I think it is, where Yeshua said that in this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. He's saying that at the end of the day, I'm taking care of everything. You will be taken care of, and you will have a place in the world to come, the Olam Haba. But you will have persecution. There will be, these saints, as we go into this a little bit more, multitudes and multitudes of saints are going to be killed for their testimony because they are following the Lord, and they're going to undergo terrible persecution and martyrdom, actually. So now there is a lot of, we'll go on with this, the examples of protection. I just wanted to bring that out just for Noah and his family was saved in the ark before God sent judgment. And Lot was delivered from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Israel was protected from the plagues of Egypt. Now, there are a lot of the commentators that I read on Revelation. They come from this century, of course, and many of them come from mainstream Christianity. There's not a whole lot of messianic commentaries out there on Revelation, and so the majority of these guys are all saying, well, the church or the believers are going to be taken away before any of the tribulation stuff starts. It's called the rapture. Okay, you may have heard of that term, and they'll say, well, God protected all throughout history. He protected his people. And I said, not so much. Look at Noah with his family. Okay, they were saved from drowning in the flood, but they weren't saved from the flood in that they had to live on a big old boat with a bunch of animals for a year, bouncing around. They bounced around on the ocean for a good long time. Then they, grounded up on top of a mountain in Turkey. And so they were in that thing for a year. Can you imagine that? So that's kind of a tribulation, I would think, being in a boat with a bunch of stinky animals. And Lot was delivered from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He wasn't just transported out, or teleported out someplace away. No, he had to walk out of it, and as they were walking out of it, God's destruction came to the point that his wife looked back to see it all, and was turned into a pillar of salt. And of course, Israel, when they were in the land of Goshen in Egypt, those plagues, God protected them from the plagues, even though the plagues were all around them. They didn't affect Israel. It's God again did not teleport those people out of there. And then when they did leave Egypt, well, they did it on foot. They walked out of Egypt, and then they had to walk through the Red Sea. I don't think those are examples of God taking somebody out of something. It's an example of his protection through the trials, the tribulations, the dangers, the plagues, and so forth. So anyway, there are some other examples of God putting his seal of protection on people. If we look at Ezekiel 9, so God was he was going to destroy the wicked in Jerusalem, And so in Ezekiel, he said, Adonai said, "Go throughout the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, make a mark on the foreheads of the people who sigh and moan over all the abominations that are committed in it." He did that in Ezekiel, and then I didn't put it in here, but then he told his angel, "All right, now you go." He had several of them, and he said, "Now you guys go through and kill everybody that doesn't have a mark on their head, because the level of corruption and idolatry and so forth in Jerusalem had gotten to the point where God was cleaning house in Ezekiel. This is a vision, but that's what he's doing. And he said, "Put a mark on the foreheads of the people. Everybody else that doesn't have this mark, doesn't matter. Man, woman, children, anybody, old, sick, whatever. If they don't have that mark that they have been faithful to me, they're going to die." So there's another example of God putting his mark on his people. So, all right, now before we go into the 144,000, any questions? So now we're going to look at the sealing of God's people. Now, John says there will be 144,000 who will have protection and a mark on their forehead. Now, they are made up from 12,000 from each tribe. And you'll also note that Satan has in Revelation, he has a counterfeit to this, and that's called the mark of the beast. And you will see that where it says if you don't have the mark of the beast, you can't buy or sell or whatever. Can't carry out commerce, and that would subject you to being a martyr. All right, so there's been a lot of ink that's been used up with people trying to figure out who the 144,000 are. And I would just kind of open it up because I've heard of some of them, and I'm going to open it up right now to see if anybody do you have what have you heard of who the 144,000 are? Because like I said, I've heard of some of them. They were kind of funny in retrospect, but anybody heard of who the 144,000 are going to be?
No, the only thing I heard was, I believe, what was it, the Jehovah's, that believe only the 144,000 will go or something?
Well, yeah, I've got this in my notes that the Jehovah's Witnesses said that there were going to be the 144,000 were all Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, they did this in the very early days of their movement, and then they got to be more than 144,000 of them, and so then they had to change their theology a little bit because, okay, now there's a couple of million of us, so only 144,000 are going to be protected. Okay, so they went back and rearranged their theology a little bit, and so a lot of people, that they've got their views. The literal view, of course, is that like Joseph had put in here, just the faithful Jewish people. That's what he has heard. It's the literal view of it is that 144,000, they are believing Jews. These are Jews that believe that they're basically Messianic Jews. They believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, and they're Jews and only Jews. There's no one else in this group. There are no Gentiles in this group. Now that's a literal view. That's what some of the commentators will say. Now there's others who take more of an apocalyptic view or a figurative view, and they see this 144,000 as a representative number of both Jews and non-Jewish believers. that they say, well, the Gentiles, if they are believers, then they've been grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. So in God's sight, in God's mind, there's no difference between the Jew and the non-Jews as long as they are believers. And then I think that's the two spectrums. That's the full range of the spectrum, and then there's quite a few views in the middle of it. I don't know that it's something that we really want to get too wound up over right now. Certainly not to get into big arguments as to exactly who the 144,000 is, what the composition or what the makeup of it is. We'll certainly understand it better as we get closer to that. Now, it's interesting to note that the tribes that we see this the tribes that are listed here in Revelation, they're different than the list. They're different than the list that you'll see in the Tanakh. Now, Michael McGuckin says, I've heard that the 144,000 is being made up exclusively of believers from different sects of Christianity. As a Seventh-day Adventist, I learned that we would make up the 144,000. Okay, I didn't know that about the Seventh-day Adventist group, but I knew that the Jehovah's Witness considered that they were going to be the 144,000 until they got to be more than 144,000 of them. So, okay, back to the drawing board. So, if we look at these two lists, say the one in Revelation 7, and then just take the one from say Genesis 49. If you look at Genesis 49, it's got Reuben and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Joseph, and sometimes instead of Joseph they'll say the half tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Benjamin. I forgot. Okay, I did not put Benjamin in there. I'm going to have to change my notes there before I send them out for good. All right, now in Revelation 7, the list has a different order. Basically, the one in Genesis is the birth order. The one in Revelation, very different. First one is Judah, and then it goes on down: Reuben, Gad, Asher, and go on and so forth. And it lists Manasseh and Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. All right, so what's the difference? In Revelation, Dan and Ephraim are missing. Now the Bible doesn't say exactly, well, it doesn't say why they are missing, but a lot of people think that perhaps it was because of the idolatry of these two groups. If you read Judges 18, the tribe of Dan had a real big problem with idolatry. And I know that Jeroboam, the rebellious king of the north, set up idols, and he put 2 golden calves for idol worship up there in the territory, and he built shrines to these idols and made sacrifices to them. He appointed counterfeit priests and established counterfeit festivals, and in 1 Kings 12 we find that he put these worship centers. He set up one in Bethel, the house of God. Remember, Bethel is where Jacob had his vision of the ladder going up into heaven. So we see that they had an idolatry problem there. Now, I know that when we visited up in Tel Dan, it's this ancient city of Dan, the ruins of a temple that Jeroboam set up. The grounds are still there. The porch, the steps up to where the temple had been are still there. And what they've done is they erected a metallic or metal framework in the shape of an altar that, and they put it on the foundation of where the altar that Jeroboam set up there in Dan, because he set that up as an alternative to the people going to Jerusalem to the feast. What he was trying to do is consolidate his kingdom up there, and if he could get them to do their worship, the counterfeit feasts and all that kind of stuff, if he could do that up there, then they wouldn't go down to Jerusalem, and they wouldn't run the risk of them getting down there and deciding, we'd rather be united with the folks in Jerusalem, and that would take and maybe split up his kingdom. So now, because we're looking at these list of tribes who are the 144,000, I want to explore a subject today that a lot of people get hung up on. In fact, there is a group or a splinter group of the Messianic movement, the Hebrew roots groups, that they build much of their theology on the idea that their members, the ones that are in their group, are the lost tribes of Israel. That if you become a believer in Yeshua, then you are by necessity part of the lost tribes of Israel. It's called the Ephraimite error in my parlance, because I do believe that they're in error. So hopefully after this lesson, we go through this bit about the 10 lost tribes. We'll maybe you'll realize that the tribes weren't so lost after all. Now, any comments, questions at this point that I've gone over so far? Okay. So let's go ahead. With the 10 tribes, the 10 tribes of Israel, 10 lost tribes, we're going to go through a little bit of history here. Now, if I get this messed up, I'm relying on Michael McGuckin to put me back on the straight and narrow, because he's the historian in the group and really sharp with this stuff. So here goes. Oh, here it was anyway. Okay. Revelation describes the two groups of people that I believe can be described as us and them. The division here of the saved continues the traditional ethnic division into Israelite, Jew, and the nations. We're going to be looking at the very thing next week, Michael, the idea of the Jews and the Israelites and the Jews, and what that makes up. And I think it's going to be kind of an interesting take on that. But there was just too much stuff. I didn't want to try to get into it all tonight, because I'm building here with the 10 tribes, and there's going to be some interesting ideas between the ethnic divisions. King David's son Solomon, as you all know, the wisest man in all the world. He ruled all of Israel. But here's a guy that was supposed to be so wise, and yet he had 1,000 wives. And what he did was these were strategic wives. It wasn't because he was particularly just wanting all these wives, but he would marry these ladies because they were political alliances. And as a result of it, though, they were all from the nations out there. They weren't Israelites. They were not, in many cases, they were not believers in the one God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so each one of these wives would bring in their own deities and so forth. So Solomon spent a lot of time and money, putting up little shrines and so forth for his different wives, and building up the temple. He built the temple, and he also did a lot of building up to protect Israel from invading armies. And if you go up to Megiddo today, you'll see the ruins of some of the things that King Solomon had built, and he had a certain type of gate that to protect his walled fortresses that have become, as they're Solomon's Gate, and it was a type of gate that made the defense of the city a little easier for the defenders. But all of this cost money, and so Solomon taxed the people just unmercifully. I mean, he just he taxed them probably worse than what we have today, and also he conscripted the people and made them, they had to serve a certain length of time as basically forced labor. He took the citizens of Israel, and this was the combined country, and he made them work. And if they didn't, then they would, they could go to prison and so forth. So after he died, then his son Rehoboam became the king, and people came to him and said, look, we've built everything up. The country is secure. We've got good defenses. We've built all of these things up. It's time now to reduce the taxes on these people and stop the forced labor because we have accomplished what your father wanted to do, and let's live in peace, and let's give the people a break. And so he was thinking about all this, and his friends said, oh, no, let's not, your father did this. Let's just double down on it, and we're going to even have more taxes. Well, when they did that, then there was a civil war. The country split, and and then a guy named Jeroboam took 10 tribes, the northern tribes, and they headquartered up in Dan, the city of Dan, up in Samaria and that area up there. The northern tribe, northern kingdom, was called Israel, and it did consist of 10 tribes. Now they had 19 kings up there, and it was from, there wasn't a real smooth transition of power up there. It was from 9 different families. Whoever was the baddest there would, they'd kill off the next bunch, and so they had 19 kings, and every single one of them was evil and led the country into more and more idolatry and just all sorts of terrible things. So that was kind of the history of the northern kingdom in a nutshell. It would be kind of interesting. It'd be interesting for me and Michael McGuckin to go back and do an actual history lesson and study the history and archaeology. But the rest of you might think, oh, you two old nerds can have it. But it's kind of interesting stuff to me. Some of the things that went on in those days that just tore the country apart. And then some of the things that these guys did. All right, now the southern part of it was, and let me go ahead and read you just. This was the description in 2 Kings 17. The men of Israel kept walking in all the sins that Jeroboam committed. They did not turn away from them until Adonai banished Israel from his presence, as he spoke by the hand of all his servants and prophets. So Israel has been exiled from their own land to Assyria to this day. So what they're talking about is the government, or the idea of Israel as its own self-contained country was banished, and it, as of the writing of this, it was still they were still banished and exiled. All right, now the southern tribes, that was Judah and Benjamin, and the capital was Jerusalem. And they had 19 kings and one queen, and they were all in line, the line of David. And so, some of the rulers were evil, some of them were good. It almost, if you study them, it was almost like every other generation. You'd have a good king and a lousy son. That son then became a bad king, but his son was a good king. But then his son was a bad king. It was almost every other generation was bad for some reason. How that worked out, I don't know. But anyway, then came along the Babylonians, and they first made the first foray when in Babylon, and where they came through Nebuchadnezzar and company. They came through in 606 BCE, and they laid siege to Jerusalem. They carried off a bunch of folks, and that began then the 70 years of exile. Then in 586 BCE, on the 9th of Av, the Tisha B'Av, the temple was destroyed. And deportation of the folks, it got serious at that point, and they took a lot of folks. I think Daniel had been taken away. The prophet Daniel had been taken away up in 606 BCE. But and then anyway, once that exile came to an end. There were 3 organized returns of the Jews. Now, in 536 BCE, led by Zerubbabel, they came back with 50,000 people that came back, and then in 458, Ezra brought back 1,750 men, and then they only counted the men, but then they brought their families, their women and children with them. 445 BCE, Nehemiah came back with the last group there, and it didn't say how many people he came back with, but we do know that a lot of people stayed in Babylon. A lot of the Jewish people stayed in Babylon, and then in actuality, it became quite the academic center. In fact, we have the Talmud today. We have the distinction between the Palestinian Talmud, or the Jerusalem Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud. And basically the Babylonian Talmud was considered probably the more correct and the more authentic, and the one that you went to. That was the go-to Talmud. All right. So now there were no organized returns of the northern tribes, and for that reason, a lot of people, they talk about, well, none of them ever came back, so they were just assimilated into the countries, and the tribes were lost, and so we don't know where they are, who they are, or anything like that. Well, if you examine it a little bit further, you will find that is not true. Now, some of the northern tribes were deported, but about 93 to 95% of the population remained. The ones that were there, and remember what these guys would do, what these conquering armies and stuff would do. They would go in and they would gather up all the literati, the people who were educated, the royalty, some of the military leaders, and basically their scholars and people like that, and they would haul them off because, okay, these were the leaders of the countries, and it didn't matter if it was Israel or some other country. That was the standard operating procedure that these guys did. They would carry off the leadership, and then that way they figured if we take the leadership out, then a rebellion would be much, much less likely, and that was, it's probably true because the people that were left, they were, the farmers, the merchants, the whatever kind of persons there were, that they weren't leaders and they weren't particularly educated, and they weren't trained, say, in the arts of war and that sort of thing. So that's what they would do. They'd take the cream of the crop out. And so then what do we find up in the northern kingdoms? The ones who remained, they intermarried. Another thing that the Assyrians would do is they would send a whole bunch of their folks down there into whatever conquered country it was, and they would be the administrators of everything. But they were also one of the things that they did. They were to intermarry with the conquered folks and basically assimilate them into the culture, the religion, the thought process of whoever the conquerors were, and so that was what they did in the northern kingdoms. And as a result, these guys that stayed behind and the Israelites that stayed behind, they intermarried with the Assyrians, and then they were called Samaritans. And so in the time of Yeshua, of course, a Samaritan was considered, they were not held in real high esteem, and they're considered half-breeds or not a pure. They were unclean. You wouldn't even, in fact, if you were going from Jerusalem up to, say, Capernaum, they would, Samaria is right there in the middle. So they would go up, they'd cross the Jordan, go up on the east side of the Jordan, around Samaria, cross back over the Jordan, and then continue their journey up to Capernaum. But so that they would not have to go through Samaria. And that was even that's why when Yeshua went up, he was going north, or I think he was coming from Jerusalem up north, and he didn't do that. He went right smack through Samaria, and that's where he met the Samaritan woman at the well, and that was just not done. That was something that the Jews just would not do. So anyway, some of the things, and we'll get into it a little bit more here in the next few slides, is that some of the people from up north, they moved south and they settled in these southern regions where Judah and Benjamin. So the tribes were never lost; they were just scattered. Now I want to show you that. If you look at it, okay, Daniel, you clicked your mic. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, the tribes that were in the north that scattered, what was their religion? I mean, did they still follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or what did they do?
No, they did not. The ones that were up in the north, and I'll get into it here in a second, but the prescribed religion of the north was some form of idolatry and paganism. And we'll see that the people that didn't want to do that got up and left, and they went back south.
So it wasn't just Dan and Manasseh. It was obviously all 10 tribes.
Oh yeah, all 10. Issachar and Naphtali and Zebulun, all of them, every one of them were into that because they had the one king, Jeroboam, and then his successors, and they led them all into idolatry. So so my suggestion of doing a history lesson was met with a great delight by Michael. And so let's do it. Judaism, a historical religion. The Bible cannot be rightly understood without its grounding in history. The book of Revelation must be historically contexted. If it's not, the book is bound to be misinterpreted, and John the Revelator can be made to say absolutely anything the translator wants him to say. Absolutely. And that's the problem that we got with Revelation today, and some of the things that people have come up with is because they don't understand the context. As someone recently wanted to argue with me about Galatians, and when I tried to bring into the fact some of the deity, goddess worship that was prevalent in Galatians, some of the things that Paul was talking about hinged on the idea of understanding that there was a very, very prevalent goddess worship there in Galatia. This fella said, well, we don't need any of that. All we need is to look at the Bible, and we can divine whatever we need right from the Bible. And that's where you get the idea that Paul was against Judaism, when you don't understand the culture, the times, the history, all of that. So that's one of the reasons that I get so picky about wanting to bring in all of these different things, is because I think it makes a difference in the way we understand the Bible. And so just as a, I read all this stuff about these guys coming back in from, they're making Aliyah into Israel today. And it's been amazing to me to see some of these folks that are coming back, say from India, and they say that they're from the tribe of Manasseh. I mean, I saw a deal the other day where there was a group of folks in Mongolia. That's what it was, and also in Mongolia, that they had been carrying on Jewish traditions for 2,000 years, and same in there was a small group in Japan that had Jewish roots. If you go to Ethiopia nowadays, the Ethiopians are recognized as being descendants of the tribe of Dan. So these tribes, they're not lost. My goodness, they're not lost. I wanted to just give you some biblical proofs here. And any other questions or comments before I do some of this, the biblical proof of the tribes not being lost and what happened to them? Any other questions right now? Because you may have some more after we do this. All right. So here's some biblical proofs, because we got all, and we'll go back and do some archaeological proofs here in a second. But okay. Let's see. When the kingdom was divided, I'm talking about the kingdom under Solomon, Shlomo. When that kingdom was divided, they had their civil war. This is about 930 BCE. So roughly, 900 years before Yeshua. It says that the devout Levites and the priests refused to participate in the idolatry and returned to Jerusalem. Now you got to remember that the Levites and the priests were scattered out all over Israel. They didn't all live in Jerusalem. They were scattered out everywhere. And in fact, there were 6 sanctuary cities that had Levites living there. And these guys administered. They were the learned people, and so they administered a lot of they did the administration of the government, and they would officiate at weddings and so forth. So these guys, they were the rabbis of the day, okay? And then they would also they had to go to Jerusalem several times a year and serve their terms in the temple. So each one of these cities, they're all throughout Israel, they had some Levites and priests living in those cities as the religious leaders of those cities. And so in 2 Chronicles here in 11, 13, and 14 it says, moreover, the Kohanim and the Levites, the priests and the Levites from all their territories throughout Israel, meaning the northern tribes there, presented themselves to him, Rehoboam, meaning the king, Solomon's son, down in Jerusalem. They presented themselves to him. The Levites even abandoned their pastures. They gave up everything because remember, in each city, the area 1,500 feet around the walls of every city belonged to the Levites. That was their ground that they could grow things and have cattle and stuff, because they did not have possessions in the land like the other tribes did. The other tribes were supposed to support the Levites, but also God knew that that the Levites needed to help support themselves, because at times the apostasy would get to the point where people were not paying their tithes and offerings, and the Levites would have gone hungry. So they were allowed to do some things for themselves, and they had possessions. And so they gave it all up, and they came to Judah and Jerusalem because Jeroboam and his sons, the northern king, had rejected them as Kohanim to Adonai, because he was having them to do all sorts of ungodly stuff, and it was and they just said, no, we're not going to do it, because that's not the way that it should be, and that would be against God. We're not going to do it. So and if we go on, here's another example in 2 Chronicles 11 and 16 and 17. Those from all the tribes of Israel who had set their hearts to seek Adonai followed the Levites to Jerusalem to sacrifice to Adonai, the God of their fathers. So they strengthened the kingdom of Judah and supported Rehoboam, the southern king, the son of Solomon, for 3 years, for they walked in the way of David and Solomon for 3 years. So here I've underlined it. Those from all the tribes of Israel they did not want to live in idolatry, so they moved to the south. And as kind of an aside, Jews are still moving to the south today. I mean, if you go to Miami, it's full of people from New York. So they're still doing it today. More immigration. King Asa ruled Judah from 910 to 869 BCE. He was a good king. He was a great king. And it says in 2 Chronicles 15, 9 and 12, kind of split it up because it was a long reading. He said he gathered all Judah and Benjamin. That was the original 2 tribes that in the southern kingdom, as well as those dwelling with them from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon. For many had defected to him from Israel when they saw that Adonai, his God, was with him, meaning that they looked and they said, this guy's doing what's right, King Asa, and God is with him. We want to be on a winning team, because up here with this bunch of yahoos that are sacrificing to, a goat or a pig or a whatever, that's not where, that's not God. So they said in verse 12, they entered into a covenant to seek Adonai, the God of their fathers, with all their heart and soul. So these guys, they wanted to get away from the idolatry. They moved south. Hezekiah is another example. He again was a good king, godly king. He reigned from 715 to 686 BCE. And in 2 Chronicles, it talks about him. It says, Hezekiah then sent word to all Israel and Judah. So he sent a word to everybody, both the northern tribes, all of the northern tribes, and then the southern tribes. He also wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh. Okay. And it says to come to the house of Adonai at Jerusalem to keep the Passover. What he was doing, he was inviting them all, the entire country, to come. Let's come to Jerusalem, and everybody, can't we just all get along and let's offer do the Passover, celebrate the Passover as one people, and do this before the Lord. And then it says, although a great multitude of the people, many of them from Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun, had not purified themselves, they didn't go through the ritual purification. Why? Because they hadn't been doing it for many, many years. I mean, this is, look at it. And Hezekiah is here from 715 to 686. So it had been 200 years since these people had been in temple or in the worship of the one true God and the Jerusalem-based religion there. So they hadn't purified themselves. They didn't know how to do that anymore, but they still ate the Passover lamb, contrary to what is written that they should. But Hezekiah looked at this, he said, and he prayed to God, said, may Adonai, who is good, atone for everyone who prepares his heart to seek Adonai, the God of his fathers, even though he is not pure according to the rules of the sanctuary. He's praying to God, said, look, these guys are coming down here. Their heart is right. They don't know how to do it. They don't know the rules, but their heart is right. So would you forgive them, make atonement for them? And God said, yes, I will. And all right, let me get in here. Michael says the religion of the northern tribes was such a blend. No wonder the northern prophets would say angrily that Hashem was jealous of their apostasy. During the better years, during which the Judeans returned to Hashem, there seems to continue this pluralism of Canaanite religions with Yahwehism, the worship of the one true God. Canaanite religion was never wholly eradicated from either of the kingdoms. That is correct. It's one of the things that major failure of the conquest of Canaan, when God said, go in there and wipe them out, every man, woman, and child, everything. Tear down all of the high places, tear down all of their shrines, tear down everything, eradicate them from the land, and they didn't do it. And so we are still dealing with that today as a result of that, even today, 3,500 years later. Okay, let me see. All right, now, here's another example of this. And Josiah, 640 to 609 BCE. So here we are now. We're 300 years since the split up of the kingdom. And this is in 2 Chronicles 34 and 9. It says, then they came to Hilkiah the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. Kohen Gadol is the high priest, and handed over the silver money that was brought into the house of God, which the Levites, the gatekeepers, they're the ones that handled things in the temple, had collected from Manasseh, Ephraim, and all the remnant of Israel, as well as from Judah and Benjamin and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So what is he saying here? That when Josiah was king and they were going to have this they were preparing for a huge Passover is what it was amounting to. And so they went and collected money from everybody. And so here it is. It's telling you that from Manasseh, Ephraim, Ephraim had been, the biggest tribe up there. And then all the remnant of Israel, all the guys that had come down from Israel, and they were living in Judah, and then the tribes of Benjamin also, and everybody that lived in Jerusalem. So what we see here, again, further biblical evidence that the tribes actually had moved down to the southern parts of the country and continued to survive. Now, if we look at this return from the exile after the Babylonian exile in 536 BCE, and this was the first one, I think this was when Zerubbabel led this one, and it says those from the children of Judah, the children of Benjamin, and the children of Ephraim and Manasseh who settled in Jerusalem. That was just I just did that little excerpt there just to show you that not only was Judah and Benjamin, which were the original ones in the southern part, but then it says the children of Ephraim and Manasseh, basically the northern tribes who came down. All right, so now then I told you I'd bring in some nerdy stuff. There was some writings that have been discovered, and you can read this in biblical archaeology, and if you're interested, let me know, and I'll look it up in the Biblical Archaeology Review, the BAR. But that King Sargon, in fact, this was from back in 1943. They discovered this stuff, so it's been around a long time. King Sargon, who was the successor that of the king from Assyria that actually initially started the invasion. He's the one that actually, Sargon is the one that actually finished the invasion and carried off a bunch of people. In his writings, they had journals and clay tablets, and it said that he deported 27,920 people from the northern kingdom, and that was in 721 BCE. Now, at that point, they estimate, and I don't know how they figured this out, but whatever. I mean, the smart guys have figured this out. That said that there were about 400 to 500,000 people living in Israel, the northern kingdoms, at this time. So what this tells me is that only 5 to 7% of the entire population was deported. So, I mean, how can a people group be totally lost if only 5 to 7% of them were taken out of the land? It just didn't happen. So, and like I say, there are people today who are still looking. They claim what tribe they're from because of based on the part of the world that they came from. So, and I think that is my last slide. And of course, I'm over time anyway. I've talked too much.